In October 2003, the late Tony Judt wrote an impassioned article for the New York Review. The distinguished historian and professor of European history at NYU signaled his frustration with refreshing frankness. The Middle East peace process is finished. It did not die, it was killed. Israel continues to mock its American patron, building illegal settlements in cynical disregard of the roadmap. The President of the United States of America has been reduced to a ventriloquist dummy, pitifully reciting the Israeli cabinet line, "It's all Arafat's fault." The problem with Israel, in short, is not, as is sometimes suggested, that it is a European enclave in the Arab world, but rather that it arrived too late. It has imported a characteristically late 19th century separatist project into a world that has moved on, a world of individual rights, open frontiers, and international law. The very idea of a Jewish state, a state in which Jews and Jewish religion have exclusive privileges from which non-Jewish citizens are forever excluded, is rooted in another time and place. Israel, in short, is an anachronism. Judt writes that, while the popular consensus among liberals was an Israeli withdrawal to the 1967 borders and a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza, I suspect that we are already too late for that. There are too many settlements, too many Jewish settlers, and too many Palestinians, and they all live together, albeit separated by barbed wire and pass laws. Whatever the roadmap says, the real map is the one on the ground, and that, as Israelis say, reflects facts. It may be that over 250,000 heavily armed and subsidized Jewish settlers would leave Arab Palestine voluntarily, but no one I know believes it will happen. Many of those settlers will die and kill rather than move. The time has come to think the unthinkable. The two-state solution, the core of the Oslo process and the present roadmap, is probably already doomed. With every passing year, we are postponing an inevitable, harder choice that only the far right and far left have so far acknowledged, each for its own reasons. The true alternative facing the Middle East in coming years will be an ethnically cleansed Greater Israel and a single, integrated, binational state of Jews and Arabs, Israelis and Palestinians. That this was early on in the discussion of a one-state solution is evident in his response to numerous criticisms leveled at him. Much of the American response verged on hysteria. Readers accused me of belonging to the Nazi left, of hating Jews, of denying Israel's right to exist. Distinguished professors at American universities canceled their subscriptions. Andrea Levine, executive director of the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting in America, accused me of pandering to genocide and being party to preparations for a final solution. Alan Dershowitz of Harvard made the analogy with Adolf Hitler's one-state solution for all of Europe. David Frum, former speechwriter for President Bush, charged me with advocating genocidal liberalism. Craig McIver, the former director of the New York office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, who resigned in protest at what he called textbook genocide in Gaza, gave sobering testimony as to the reality of the so-called two-state solution.
You say the mantra of a two-state solution has become, and I quote, an open joke in the corridors of the United Nations.
Explain. It is, and it has been for quite a long time. If you ask somebody in their official capacity about the two-state solution, they will repeat that phrase to you over and over again as the official position of the United Nations. Indeed, it is the official position of the United States. But nobody who follows these circumstances, either from the political side or from the human rights side, believe, one, that a two-state solution is possible anymore. There's nothing left for a Palestinian state that would be sustainable or just or possible in any respect, and everyone knows that. And so when people are not talking from official talking points, you hear increasingly about a one-state solution. And what that means is beginning to advocate for the principle of equality, of human rights, instead of these old political taglines. That would mean a state in which you have equal rights for Christians, Muslims, and Jews, based upon human rights and based upon the rule of law.
Ghada Karmi has perfectly described the hollow ring of the term two-state solution. Prolonged concentration on the two-state outcome as the only solution for the conflict had made it into a mantra that discouraged imaginative thinking. Virginia Tilley, professor of political science at Southern Illinois University Carbondale, has all but demolished the wishful thinking behind the two-state solution. By the end of the 1990s, she writes, the settlements were major urban complexes burrowed deep into Palestinian territory. Their major connecting highways had sliced the territory into chunks, and 230,000 settlers were embedded in the region with jobs, children, social networks, and full cultural lives. That number is now as many as 700,000 for context. Even if most settlers claimed they would leave in exchange for financial compensation, this massive grid's economic, political, and demographic weight rendered it a politically immovable object. Any visitor looking at these massive planned communities and their huge road network promptly loses any idea that the Israeli government has any intention of removing them. By comparison, at their height, the settlements in the Sinai Peninsula or Gaza never numbered more than 24 and contained far less than 10,000 people each. They were essentially scattered outposts. After electing Hamas to government in 2006, by plurality but still through democratic elections, Israel laid siege to the Strip. The swirling anger from the blockade and the numerous so-called wars, which saw little urban fighting and were essentially waves of massive punitive destruction, were a continuation of what Israeli journalist Amira Haas has described as the good old Israeli experiment called put them into a pressure cooker and see what happens. But the walling off of Gaza into its pressure cooker and the apartheid grid in the West Bank is not a long-term solution. As Tilley presciently observed, the Bantustan plan will consign Israel's Jewish population to a permanent state of threat. Withering in their walled enclave, the Palestinian people will continue to resist conditions of daily misery and political destruction. And as their population grows rapidly within its sealed territorial vessel, the demographic, economic, and political pressures will build to critical mass. Juxtaposed in the highlands, pressed together cheek by jowl in gerrymandered borders, Jewish and Palestinian sectors cannot endure such pressures indefinitely. The formula is explosive, promising increasingly desperate acts of violence and possibly even mass insurrection by the Palestinians. If such unrest triggers more intense Israeli repression or, in the worst case, even an attempt to expel the Palestinians en masse from the territory, an action advocated by extremists already gaining influence in the Israeli government, a specter of regional conflagration would face Israel and the international community as a whole. As Ghada Karmi, herself raised in exile after her family were expelled from Jerusalem in 1948, describes it, a one-state solution offers not just a framework for justice, but a foundation for genuine, lasting peace. According to the adherents of the one-state solution, in a single state, no Jewish settler would have to move and no Palestinian would be under occupation. The country's scarce resources could be shared without Israel stealing Palestinian land and water, or Palestinians left starving and thirsty. Jerusalem would be a city for both peoples, not the preserve of Israel to the anger of Arabs, Muslims, and Christians, and the detriment of international law. Palestinian refugees would be allowed to return to their original homeland, if not to their actual homes. Their long exile and blighted existence would end, and the states that had played host to them could be relieved at last of a burden they had carried for more than 70 years. The long-running sore of dispossession that had embittered generations of Palestinians and perpetuated their resistance could heal at last. Palestinians would have the right to move, perhaps out of the West Bank or Gaza and into the territory of the current state of Israel, maybe into the Israeli-built settlements. Would this end in a subaltern genocide of the Jewish population? Virginia Tilley believes that worse fears, for example, of mass expulsion of the Jewish population, are greatly overdrawn. Some do imagine that anti-Jewish hostility by a Palestinian Arab majority within a secular democratic state would take the form of outright military attack or mass traumatic expulsion of the Jewish population. Many constraints would impede such actions, however, not least the new state's dependency on international trade and the Palestinian population's own anxieties for the country's stability. But also, with Israeli occupation gone, the very motive for anti-Jewish violence, which Zionism has always recast as anti-Semitic in origin, would evaporate. Hence, a kind of racial terror of vengeful Arab native seeking Jewish extermination is more a classic settler colonial paranoia than the likely outcome of a democratized Palestinian state. Indeed, Jewish language about bloody Arab revenge echoes strongly of identical Afrikaner forebodings about ethnic cleansing and mass murder by blacks upon an end to apartheid. Jewish apprehension about these possibilities reflects partly simple racism, antipathy toward Arabs moving into the neighborhood, and partly fear that mass return will translate into expelling Jews from their, sometimes formerly Palestinian, homes. Some prior agreement must secure people's homes, a delicate subject for negotiation. But, as happened in South Africa, mass demographic flows would be moderated by many factors, including individual choices regarding ethnic quote-unquote comfort zones, availability of housing and jobs, kin ties to present-day Arab communities, and income levels. A greater Jewish fear is that a Palestinian majority would eventually use its electoral clout to dismantle constitutional protections. But that risk can be addressed by, say, making any constitutional change affecting minority rights contingent on approval by a majority of that minority. Peter Beinart as well says the colonial fears of Palestinian reprisals against Jews are overstated, and provides compelling evidence to support this. When Jews imagine a state that grants Palestinians equality between the river and the sea, many envisage the supposed barbarism and dysfunction of the Middle East descending upon pristine Tel Aviv. White South Africans, who took an equally dim view of their surrounding, nurtured similar fears. Why didn't the comrades of the ANC and PAC storm through neighborhoods like my grandmother's chanting "one settler, one bullet" and massacring whites once apartheid fell? At its core, the answer is achingly simple. Because most people, black, white, Catholic, Muslim, Palestinian, whatever, don't take up arms lightly. They don't want to kill or be killed. They do it when they feel they have no other choice. When oppressed people gain a voice in government, they gain another way of speaking to those in power, one that doesn't risk their lives. That doesn't make political violence disappear, but it tends to decrease. Beinart looks to an overlooked population that shows peace between Palestinians and Israelis isn't all that far-fetched. Every day, Israeli Jews who are deathly afraid of Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank place themselves in Palestinian hands when they're at their most vulnerable, on the operating table. Palestinian citizens, sometimes called Arab Israelis, constitute 25% of Israel's doctors, 30% of its nurses, and 60% of its pharmacists. Yet few Israeli Jews fear they'll be bludgeoned when they enter a hospital or poisoned when they enter a drugstore. Indeed, they don't generally fear violence from Palestinian citizens at all. They don't even fear violence from Palestinian citizens who are Islamic fundamentalists. In 2021, an Islamist party, the United Arab List, actually joined an Israeli coalition government. Why do Israeli Jews find Palestinian citizens so much less threatening? It's not because Palestinian citizens don't care about being Palestinian. It's not because they don't remember what Israel did to their families in 1948. It's not because they like Zionism. More than anything, it's because they have citizenship. They can vote. So, although they face severe discrimination, they at least have some peaceful and lawful methods for making their voices heard. Compare that with Palestinians in Gaza, who have no legal way to influence the state that bombs and imprisons them. In 2018, when they marched, largely peacefully, to the fence that encloses Gaza, they were simply shot. On the role of Israel as a sanctuary for Jews from anti-Semitic violence, Virginia Tilley admits the argument is undeniably powerful, but Jews are today nowhere subjected to more danger than in Israel itself. And for some, Israel is even seen as vaguely corrosive to life within the Jewish diaspora, especially when its brutal occupation policies are deliberately identified by Zionists as reflecting the interests and will of Jews everywhere, tarring all with the same brush. In any case, the perceived unfeasibility of such a scenario is irrelevant. The one-state solution cannot be dismissed. However overwhelming these obstacles appear, for no other choice remains. A viable Palestinian state has become impossible. The land base is insufficient, The Jewish settlements and Palestinian villages are juxtaposed in an intimate patchwork, and the two economies are already fused into one, bound inextricably by trade, labor, and natural resources. Some solid proposal may seem necessary to counter the first common objection to the one-state option, which is that it is unfeasible. Again, the one-state solution cannot be dismissed on grounds of its feasibility. Like a well gone dry, the two-state solution is already obsolete. Rejecting the remaining one-state reality as unfeasible is therefore pointless. So says Ghada Karmi, Israel will fiercely reject the shared state, but will be powerless to prevent it happening.